The Return, Chapter 10, The Vengeance Gala. It was a full month before Saam saw any of them again. The night of the Vengeance Gala, he was standing uncomfortably on the red carpet beside the director, smiling patiently as the cameras flashed, mostly ignoring the facile questions. One-word answers where he could, silence if at all possible. The outfit that Nadia had chosen for him had been tailored and delivered to the office while he was gone, and he had seen it for the first time that day. He'd put it on in one of the bathrooms, frowned at himself in the mirror, scratched behind one ear. Emerging, he held out his hands to ask the rest of the team for their opinion. Their heads on one side, the women beamed, grinned, and nodded. The Regency shirt and brocade jacket had at least their seal of approval. Lily squealed when she saw him, ran along the carpet to him, and leaped so that he was forced to catch her mid-air. She wrapped her legs round him and hugged him fiercely. He hugged her back and buried his nose in her soft yellow hair. She had saved him a chocolate from the hotel, she said, and he allowed her to unwrap it and feed it to him. Ate it slowly while she prattled about the trip, how happy Mum and Dad were, how everybody missed him. No, Lily said, the boys weren't with them tonight. Tash couldn't come, and Nicky wouldn't come without him. "That's you," pointing at one of the big posters. "You look really funny without your hair." "I agree," said Saam. He smiled as Lewis and Nadia approached. The beard was gone. Lewis smiled and rubbed a hand over his smooth face. "Better." Saam nodded. "Better." They nodded in unison. The generous paunch was proving harder to eliminate, but Saam could see that Lewis had made progress there too. "That's Daddy." Lily was pointing to a huge poster of Lewis, 15 years younger and considerably more svelte, in a Hanath uniform. Saam shuddered a little. "He's scary." Lily laughed happily at the idea as Nadia gentled her down onto the floor. Saam said softly, "She's not watching." "No." He nodded. That was for the good. A woman wearing a sparkling strapless dress fell backwards over her heels and almost knocked him down. He caught her, put her on her feet while she swore and tried to keep the top of the dress from falling round her waist. Fucking thing." "Oh." He smiled at her. Then there was the sound of a gentle gong, and people started moving into the massive auditorium to watch the vengeance. Again. Saam wasn't expecting any surprises. He was mistaken. The movie was a completely different animal to the one Saam remembered. A thrilling, newly composed orchestral score, soon to be award-winning, if the audience reaction was anything to go by. The faces of the main Kherrip painstakingly, and at excruciating expense, digitally reworked, all traces of the old latex masks gone, though the voices were still familiar to him. Tight editing made the film, now 2.5 hours instead of 90 minutes, move like a bullet train. There were so many new scenes. Some were freshly recorded, partly done in AI CGI. Some were old scenes that hadn't passed the censor 15 years ago, scenes that Saam had forgotten recording. Some were scenes that had been left out because they didn't show the fighters in an entirely positive light. Like the scene after a raid, where dirty, bloodied, and buzzing with adrenaline, Saam had been halfway through forcing himself on a Xonak girl before he raised his head and looked at her face. She'd smiled at him, and he'd taken it as encouragement. Now she smiled again and dropped her gaze. In the massive movie theatre, Saam leaned forward in his seat, breathing deeply, a shaking hand over his mouth, trying not to vomit. There were flashbacks then. Child Saam naked, faced by a large, equally naked man, seen thankfully only from behind. Smile. Child Saam tried. The blow that followed was crushing. The little boy made no sound as the man lifted him by the hair and pulled him back on the bed. Smile. Saam tried again. Better. Then there was another massive blow. Drop your gaze. Don't look at me. There was a pause before he pulled the boy onto the bed again. Smile. Child Saameron smiled. It was almost unbearable to look at. His eyes were tearing, but he was smiling sweetly, his eyes lowered. He was trembling. His face was starting to swell. Are you crying? Another massive blow. The audience was squirming with horror. Some covered their faces. Fighter Saam was readjusting the girl's clothes, moving her away from the bulkhead he had pushed her against. Let's find a bunk. The other fighters milled around like overexcited dogs, some of them showing an interest in the girl. Saam pushed one of them away almost casually and kept walking. They found an unoccupied bunk, and he pushed her into it, guiding her, protecting her head from the upper bunk. Shah was there, his only friend, a Xonak fighter, uniformed, wild-eyed, half-starved and half-crazy, pretty much as Saam remembered him. The remastering made his eyes doubly beautiful. Softly under his breath, "You know that's not—" "Fuck off, Shah." He pushed the girl against the wall and put his arms around her. Only a close observer would even notice that she was there. Which was good, because, as evidenced by Shah's reaction, it was a clear infringement of the rules, which might be punished savagely, Nadiv style. He nuzzled her gently, almost whispered, "I'm sorry, get some sleep," and held her. She looked carefully at him for a while, watched as his breathing slowed down. Looked at the lean, underfed features, the dirty uniform, the almost shaved head. When she was sure he was asleep, she indulged herself, allowed herself to tear up. Quietly. More fighting, spectacular scenes of raids. Saam trembled and closed his eyes. The next flashback was one that Johnson had heard Saam describe in the report-back meeting, the meeting where he had cleared a desk to get to the lawyer, Snide. A scene that hadn't passed the censors last time. A training day. The lead trainer, a truly massive Nadiv, asked if anyone could swim. Saam, long-haired, still plump by ship standards, hopelessly manicured and pretty, nodded and said something. The Nadiv walked across to tower over him. "Look at me." Saam's eyes remained down. He looked at the man's waist. I said. The trainer's blow felled him. Then the Nadiv picked him up by the hair and jerked his head back, forced Saam to look him in the eye. "Fucking look at me." Saam took a breath and did his best. "Do not fucking smile at me, you cowed little fuck. Now, what did you say, pretty boy?" "I said my owner taught me to swim." Saam struggled to stand upright, looked at him, intimidated but not humbled, not smiling. There was a spark of defiance in him that even slavery hadn't extinguished. The trainer explained to him almost gently that this was not the way to talk. The Hanath, it was a Hanath, right? He laughed, snorted his distaste. The Hanath had owned his collar, not him. "But if you are going to talk like a slave, we will treat you like one." The rape was horrific. The woof of expelled air, the sound of bones breaking in Saam's face as he was thrown across a piece of exercise equipment. It was the only sound he made. There was a close-up of his face, head bowed, eyes closed, face tight in pain, submitting, merely surviving, waiting stoically for it to pass. When he was eventually allowed to slump to the floor, the trainers were already discussing something else. The lead trainer, glancing at him in annoyance, said, "Get back to your bunk and sleep it off." Saam tried. He couldn't stand. He carried on trying. The trainer watched him coolly, then said to one of the bigger men, "Take him out." And he lifted Saam in his arms like a child and carried him outside. "Well, at least he can swim." And he laughed. The training session ended, and the group dispersed in utter silence from the massive hangar bay. The second Nadiv trainer, who had, completely without any sign of emotion, joined in the rape, looked at the lead trainer. "What?" The other man twisted his mouth, shrugged with his face. "What?" "I know why you do that with each new intake. I understand. I'm just sorry it was him." "Someone always volunteers. Had to be someone. He just had the biggest mouth, that's all. I think we might be able to make a fighter out of him. Only if he's a fast learner." Saam's face was swollen almost beyond recognition, were it not for the eyes, now blackened and bruised. He sat on one hip gingerly as he took a massive knife to his golden curls, a huge serrated knife meant for killing rather than shearing. He was clumsily cutting off chunks of hair and throwing them onto the floor. His face was angry, and the message was clear. "That is the last time some bastard picks me up by the hair." "I could get you a soother." Shah was distressed for him. "There's a Nadiv officer who—" He trailed off. It was obvious what would be required of him, and that the Xonak was one shock away from a complete mental collapse, or an explosion. "No." Saam looked at him gently. His lips were terribly battered, so it was hard to talk. "You want to help me?" "Wired," Shah said. "Yes, of course." Saam passed him the knife. "Cut this fucking hair for me." The High Hanath officer, played by Lewis, had a thrilling death. Saam, a seasoned fighter now, dispatched the man with his knife. He jammed it viciously into the man's side, just below the armpit, finding at once the only known weakness in their body armor. Then he twisted. He took a moment to watch quietly as the aristocratic arsehole realized he was dying. Saam looked into his eyes, smiled a little at him, almost sadly. "Smile," he said, and turned the knife again, savagely. Saam's own death was pretty much as before. He'd interfered in a rape, and the Xonak whose entertainment he had interrupted calmly expressed his displeasure by killing him at the next opportunity, shot him in the back during a raid. The only difference was the soaring music, heightening the tragic effect. Saam could hear a woman sobbing in the audience. When the lights went up, there was stunned silence, then a roar of approval, people standing in their seats and clapping. So they liked it. The Vengeance, which had been a thrilling action movie your children could watch, whose only selling point was the E.T. characters, was now a harrowing, gritty drama focused on the characters on board a raiding ship at war, and firmly adults only. The speakers were introduced by a podgy British comedian who struck fear into the hearts of many of the actors there, since his humour made no allowances for their feelings. He had hosted a number of ceremonies where actors received awards for excellence and were mocked pitilessly in the process. He introduced the production team, making them feel foolish as the crowd made them feel like kings. They talked, but Saam wasn't really listening. He wanted a drink. He was exhausted. He looked round. Champagne. tall, slim glasses. Damn it. He was distantly aware as they explained very carefully that child Saam had not been played by a child actor, for obvious reasons. The visual character was computer-generated, motion-captured from a grown actor, and retrofitted with an age-regressed model of Saam himself. The voice was AI-produced, sampled from Saam's own voice, but computer-adjusted to fit the age of the character. Whatever all that meant. One of the staffers took him to the wings. When the comic picked up his card to introduce Saam, he waited to be insulted or mocked, wondering what the man would find to say about him. The tubby comic grimaced, ripped up the card and threw it over his shoulder, bent to the mic. "Saameron," he said. Puzzled, Saam took to the stage, to an absolute roar of applause. He smiled at them, checked over his shoulder to look for Johnson. The big man was right where he should be. Behind him a massive screen was showing the famous shot of Saam dying, his hands thrown in the air by the blast, remastered perfectly in focus. He looked down at the glittering audience. "I feel like I've been through a battle." More applause, some cheering. It had been a hard movie to watch. He took out the cards the publicist had given him, settled them gently on the mic podium. Those near to him could see his hands were trembling slightly, but his voice was calm. He read, "I've been asked to tell you about the Saameron project." There was shuffling, sighing, one or two groans. This was going to be stuffy, they could just feel it. How disappointing. "The goal of the project is to locate, rescue, rehabilitate, retrain, and integrate those ETs who have found themselves in less than welcoming circumstances. Smile." Saam stopped. He froze, looked at the card in puzzlement. Smile? He looked up, then back at the cards. "Oh, I think she meant me to smile at that point." He huffed and gave a small smile, a smile that barely touched his mouth, and nothing else. The audience was silent, horrified. He looked up at them. "I guess she hasn't seen the movie yet." The crowd watched him in appalled compassion. The host was gesturing to him, mouthing, "Rip them up," and pantomiming ripping the cards and throwing them away. The crowd voiced their agreement, while Saam poised as if to tear the cards, then gently put them down, face down. The audience loved it. He smiled at them. He pointed a finger over his shoulder, towards Johnson. "I know you can't see the man behind me, and I can't use his name or we'll both be in trouble. His job is to go with me when we extract an ET. Among other things, he's supposed to keep me out of trouble. I have to say he's not very good at that." Saam smiled again. "He's unhappy tonight because he thinks he looks ridiculous in a..." He waved his hands at his clothes. "A tuxedo, right?" He looked down at himself, then up at them, showed the palms of his hands in appeal, as if to say, "You think you have problems?" And now he's happy because he told me at least 3 times to read the cards before we got here. We were busy. He's really looking forward to saying, "I told you so." The crowd were with him, eager for him to do well. "Just over a month ago, we went to a country in the Middle East to bring back an ET, a Kherrip. He was already dead when we got there. He'd been beaten, brutally, savagely beaten, raped, castrated, and somewhere along the line he died. The heat was intense. The mortuary air coolant system was just about broken, and the bodies were rotting. The stench was unimaginable. I puked. My friend Lewis would tell you that I am not as tough as I look, and that I never looked so tough to begin with. So,
I am not the hero you see in this movie. I'm just a man who was lucky enough to be rescued and given English, who met some powerful humans and was allowed to do something. Many of the ETs who arrived when I did are safe now, but there are others who still need to be found, so there's work to be done. Some of the ETs are highly intelligent, highly skilled, and pass fairly easily for human. I don't worry much about them. Then there are the ones like me.
He smiled again. More than one news outlet would later use the image of him smiling this way and refer to it as his "please don't hurt me" smile.
The ones who have no skills, unless you count the ability to smile while you're being hurt, and look happy when you're being touched by someone who terrifies you and makes your skin crawl. These are the ones I worry about. Without help, many of them will end up like that man. There's no way to know his name, who died because he had no way to hide. When we made this movie, all I knew how to do was to follow orders, how to fight, and how to make people like me. I had been locked up, mostly alone, in an institute for almost a year, and there were so many women on the shoot. They were all so friendly. So I went out of my way to please as many of them as I could.
Laughter.
The food was rationed to keep us all as lean as possible. The biscuits especially, like the ones they're handing out with the champagne. Little sugary biscuits.
He held up his fingers to demonstrate.
We had those, something like them, but they were carefully rationed. I was in the food queue one day. Our hearing is a lot better than yours. When I heard two women discussing me, laughing. One of them said...
He hesitated, sucked his bottom lip, not entirely happy about remembering the event.
She said, "Do you think he would do me if I asked him nicely?"
A pause.
Her friend said, "Honey, I think he would do you for a biscuit."
The audience were quiet, shocked. Saam shrugged.
"I was hurt by that,"
he admitted. He leaned closer to the mic.
"But I got a lot of biscuits."
They roared their approval, clapped and cheered, laughed at his little joke as if it were the funniest thing they'd ever heard. He let them calm a little, then said,
"I'm here to ask you to help where you can. If you have money, we'll find a use for it. If you have skills or you employ people with skills, we need to train our people. If you have influence, we need you humans to take our side, because even now the law does not see us as people. I, and those like me, have no more rights than your pet dog. The legal department is trying to shut down the production of sex toys, animated dolls that are made to look like me. In particular, the ones that look like me as a child."
He paused.
"Their biggest problem is me. Because I have no rights, it's hard for them to do anything about it. If you are an ET, it is difficult to earn a living, hard to own a home, and impossible to marry legally. I've learned to like dogs, but I don't want to live as one, as a pet. I know humans have a lot of problems of your own to worry about, but I am asking you to add one more to the list. We're just people. I ask you to see us that way and help where you can. Thank you."
When he walked off stage, took the steps to ground level, a flustered, red-faced woman handed him a baby Labrador, his soon-to-be ex-publicist. He cradled it gently.
"Why am I holding a puppy?"
Cameras flashed. Lily came to say goodbye. She played with the puppies for a while, making hopeless eyes at her parents. Then she pulled Saameron's shirt so that he bent down to her, touched noses with him, turned her face so they could make their eyelashes meet. He kissed the top of her head. Louis grabbed him in a bear hug.
Fame at last.
Saam hugged him hard.
You still scare me.
Louis laughed.
Good death scene, no?
Saam nodded.
It was a pleasure to kill you.
Louis nodded. Until tonight he had never understood the full significance of Saam's line. Smile. He hugged his friend goodbye. As they left to take Lily home and the puppies were carried away, Saam turned to grab a coffee cup from a passing server who was struggling with a tray of them.
Is it okay if I...
The man smiled and nodded.
Thanks.
Then he stopped a waiter with flutes of champagne, long enough to empty 2 of them into his coffee cup. Another beaming smile from a stranger. And then finally he drank. The world turned round him, without him, and he drank. He looked up for a moment when the cup was nearly empty, to see the woman in the sparkling dress. An actress, he thought, but he didn't know her name. She was putting out a tentative hand to feed him one of those sugary biscuits, to put it into his mouth with her bare hand. He accepted it from her gently, smiling, ate it slowly. So that's your real smile. He frowned a little, took another flute of champagne, and poured it into his coffee cup. Sipped, looked at her with interest. Could I kiss you? He tilted his head, looked at her.
That will cost you another biscuit.
She hastily picked up another biscuit from a passing waiter. He took it as he had the last one, taking his time to eat it. It was very sensual. Hard to know if that was deliberate. Possibly not, since she had watched him eat the little girl's chocolate the same way. Okay, she asked. He nodded. She came right up close to him and after a moment's hesitation kissed him. As she would tell her girlfriends later, gave him her best smooch. He didn't move, allowed her to kiss him without reacting. She stood back, disappointed. I was hoping you might kiss me back. Saam smiled again, another genuine smile.
That will cost you.
Another biscuit? For goodness sake, I just gave you another one.
Did you think I was cheap?
He emptied the coffee cup and looked round for more champagne, while she hunted for biscuits. Then he thought better of it and put down the cup. She was back with 3 or 4 biscuits in her hand. Seriously, he said softly.
You know there are cameras everywhere.
So?
So I wouldn't want you to wake up tomorrow morning regretting this.
What he didn't know, but was made clear to him the next day, was that a camera crew had been tasked to follow his every move that night, discreetly. Nothing he did that evening escaped them, including what felt like a private flirtation with an actress whose name he didn't even know. She opened her palm and showed him the biscuits, snorted softly, laughing. I'd like you to kiss me. Please.
Okay.
He took another biscuit, ate it slowly, while she stood in front of him with her hand out. He walked behind her, bent his head close to the back of her neck, breathed in her scent. She could feel his breath on the nape of her neck, the backs of her ears. He was brushing her skin with his lips. What are you doing?
Where do you like to be kissed?
She shivered and giggled, finally self-conscious. Oh, all the usual places, I guess. He trailed his fingertips down her bare arm from shoulder to wrist, lifted the empty hand and raised her palm to his face, barely touched it with his lips, then put it down gently. She shivered. You know... Shh. He walked round to face her, stroked her cheek with the backs of his fingers, ran his fingertips, feather light, along her upper lip. Then he put his hands on her waist very lightly, eased her so close that she could smell the biscuit on his breath, so close that their noses were touching. She moved to touch him, but he shook his head. She became still then and let him kiss her. The kiss was gentle at first, soft and sweet. Then he moved his hands a little higher, pulled her into him, and it became a very deep kiss indeed. She lost track of time, stopped breathing. The biscuits fell unregarded from her hand. When he finally backed off a little, she moaned. She was light-headed. He nuzzled against her face, much like a puppy, she thought. No, a kitten. Her insides were liquid. She opened her eyes to see if he was laughing at her, but his face was kind.
"Oh, fuck me," she sighed. "That would cost you another biscuit."
They were laughing then, both delighted with what had just happened. He bent his head to touch her lips again, whispered, "Thank you." "I've been looking everywhere for you," her partner for the evening. Saam's hands fell away from her, and she felt the loss. "We have to go, Jen. We have an early call tomorrow." He didn't acknowledge Saam. A mistake. Later that night, she would use his rudeness as an excuse to start a fight that ended their brief romance. He had switched on the TV set to drive away the silence. It was a stupid show. They were all stupid, but this was worse than most. A bunch of middle-aged, old some of them, women talking and arguing about nonsense. Artem stood with his coffee in his hand, glowered at these old bitches. Who were they tearing into today? One of them was demanding to know, "Why is this man not married? Would someone please tell me why this perfect man is not married?" Shots then of Saam at the gala, carrying and nuzzling Lily, laughing, accepting a chocolate from her, delicately handing her a puppy. The butterfly kisses shot when they touched eyelashes, his parting kiss to the top of her head. "I'll tell you why, because the law doesn't allow it. We all know who he is, but did you know he still has no legal rights in this country? No right to own property, no right to marry, no right to privacy. We'll be talking to our legal experts about that later in the program, and the impact that has in their fight against Saameron-based pornography. Don't change channels." Another woman asked, "Am I the only one who sees how he eats? I could watch that man eat all day. When I'm not watching Timothy Oliphant walk, I want to watch Saameron eat. Do you know that there are YouTube compilations of him eating?" Behind her a video was playing. Saam eating Lily's chocolate. Saam eating the biscuit that some young bitch in a fancy dress was feeding to him. "We'll be talking about why people are starting to call this the 'please don't hurt me' smile." And there was a shot of Saam, with that little fake smile he wore when he was unhappy. "But most of all, we'll be talking about that kiss. Oh my, have you seen this?" They played a video of Saam taking his time about kissing the girl with the biscuits. Hot or what? There was a general chorus of hot, hot, hot. Did you hear him say thank you afterwards? Oh my goodness! All this and a review of the new Vengeance, which is out now. Don't go anywhere. Artem's cup smashed against the wall. At least he had managed not to smash the TV again. He roared, "Fuck it!" Of course he would have to watch the rest. No, like every useless, stupid woman in America, he was not going anywhere. Many streets away in a far more expensive home, Nadia was also watching. watching glumly as Saam cast his innocent spell over them, charmed them. She wiped a finger beneath one eye, sighed, and went to make breakfast for Lily and the boys.